Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. Today's episode, we're going to discuss sports performance. So, let's kick it. To get this episode started, I think it's important to clarify what sports performance training means to us here at Kilo. Alex?
Well, what it doesn't mean is trying to recreate sports-specific movements that you would do on the field in the gym. We see a lot of trainers do that where they use bands and they're trying to work on their swing and they're trying to make weight training so sports-specific. And weight training isn't. It's always going to be just weight training. It's like what you're doing to prepare to be better on the field, but you're not trying to mimic what you do on the field with weights.
Yeah, I think it's the important differential between being the strength coach and the actual sports coach.
Yeah.
Porrick?
So, for me, sports performance is very reminiscent of normal training. It's just that we've got very specific demands to prepare the athlete for and a very specific time frame. Whereas a lot of other training, that's not as apparent. You have unlimited time and generally not as specific of goals. So it's just the preparation to meet the demands of what the athlete has to endure or come up against in whatever time frame they have. So generally it's going to be some level of strength, speed, power demands, and you just have to accommodate that to where the athlete is currently and what time frame you have.
Steph?
The way I see it is, I think that over the years there's been misrepresentation or misunderstanding of sports performance training. If you look, historically speaking, if you look at sports performance training in the 70s and 80s, the way it worked is the high-level athlete and team sports back then, training was nothing. I'm not even going to go there. But Olympic level athletics, the athletes would go to a facility with exercise scientists, sports coaches, strength coach, and they were all working in unison at perfecting biomotor abilities needed for the sport and tactical and technical abilities all at once at the same time under one roof. So the strength was the strength, the speed was the speed, the tactical was the tactical, the agility was the agility with the sports coach and all that kind of stuff. And that's just my perspective. It's not like I read a book, an article on this, but now, what happened in the 90s with the push towards personal training in the private sector, now you have young students graduating from university with exercise science degree that become personal trainers, but at the end of the day, they really want to work with athletes because we all know that training athletes is more fun just because of their potential.
I know.
Anyways, I guess that's true because I like to say I graduated of University of Montreal in 2000, and the first 3 years is pretty much the same thing for everybody, and then year 4 we had one of 3 choices. Either you go to become a phys ed teacher, you go in the health sector, or you went in the sports performance sector. Out of 180 people who graduated in 2000, only one went in sports, and it was me. And most people went in phys ed or health. So in that sense, you're probably right, but I think it has more to do with the fact that there was more jobs in these fields than sports performance.
Definitely a more challenging field to get into.
So I think that going back to the whole personal training stuff, now trainers work in commercial gyms, or they start working in small private facility, or they open up their own gym. They're training Gen Pop, but they want to train athletes. So now they start getting athletes. But what does that personal trainer / strength coach have access to? The weight room. So now they're like, well, I'm training an athlete. I'm going to try to do everything that the athletes need, but I can only do it in the confine of my weight room. So to me, that's when the whole functional training or sports-specific weight room training that Alex is talking about, that to me, it's when it actually kind of like came up. Like they saw like Werner Guntor do like very special exercise applied to shot putting in that video in the early 80s. And then they had a misunderstanding of what that was and when that was applied. And now they're like, well, I'm training an athlete, a golfer. We're going to do a golf swing with a pulley because that's what I have access to, and it looks sports specific. So I'm going to cater to golfers. And then the whole thing so it evolved, and it became this thing where sports performance training became weird, and it became a mixture of a bunch of random stuff to kind of like justify the value of the training session in the gym. And I think that things got really, really mixed up. And I think that that's one of the reasons why today young coaches are so confused as to what is sports performance training.
But you're not saying that. So you're saying the crazy stuff that we see stems from that, but there was weight training specific for athletes before that, or no?
No, not per se. Like, so
They're more just
I would use it's kind of like what Porrick was saying back in the days when they were in the weight room. They were doing like boring stuff, like squats, front squats, clean press, bench, whatever. That's what they were doing. Because why? Because the sports coaches understood that, okay, well, my athlete needs more strength. Mm-hmm. They understood that strength was one of the main underpinning biomotor abilities. So, okay, they need more strength. What do we know helps increase strength? Well, those big multi-joint movements. So they did that, and that's it. They did that for strength. Now, as the season approached or a competition approached, then they used special exercises, which was kind of like coined by Yuri Verkhoshansky, where they might use a barbell, but that was not really the thing. Like they would use whatever. They could use a slightly heavier shot, but then they would do quasi sport specific movement, but really all it was is they were drills to kind of cue positioning for the application of their very simplistic sporting action. And by this, I by no mean I'm displaying the skill set of being a top level shot putter, but what I'm saying is the sport is one single action. Yep. So then they would deconstruct this action with a barbell, but they were just training like, for example, like hip rotation in the proper pattern. And so that was the extent of the sport specific, and that was really just like a smooth transition between their squatting and bench pressing, intertwined with them starting more extensive work of shot put. Yeah. So they were still doing shot put technical work. And now, as the intensity of the shot training increased, the amount of that sport specific or special exercise they were doing outside of the field decreased. And then it became more shot put.
Yeah, like a really easy way to visualize it is like it's somewhat using the emphasis model. That say they had 20 units of training per week or per day, whatever way you want to look at it. And really early on, 15 of those units was towards strength training and 5 was towards technical training. And then as that progressed, that technical training transitioned into more extensive work with, say, 8 units and 12 units being the strength training. Then by the time you're getting to the more intensive side of the shot put training, it could have been 12 units of shot put training, and then like 8 units of these like special exercises. And then by the time you're focusing 100% shot put training, it could be 18 units dedicated to shot put training, with 2 units dedicated to any other form of resistance training.
Yeah.
Just to try and maintain that while really expressing as much specialized training as possible.
Yeah. And then, so what happened is like I said, back then, team sports,
They didn't train.
strength and conditioning was not even a thing. Like, and Alver Meal kind of started in the late 70s, but with the Raiders, but it was the exception to the rule. Okay. It was not really a thing. So now you had athletes in the off season that now in the late 80s, early 90s started realizing, well, you know what? If I want to have an edge, I need to train in the off season. But there was no like training facility in Calgary or in what's the place in Colorado?
Colorado Springs.
Colorado Springs. That was not a thing for these guys, right? So now they reverted to the personal trainer that their buddy said was really good. So they go there. But the model is completely different. Like the Olympic style of training, you're going to that facility, you're there all day doing all the things. But now you're a pro athlete coming into a private sector model. So now, guess what? We have 1 hour. You're paying for your hour.
Yeah.
You might come 3-4 times a week. And now I'm supposed to build the ultimate athlete here with that 1 hour, 3-4 times a week. And now that's fine if the strength coach is able to tell the athlete, listen, I'm a strength coach, so I'm going to help you develop the strength component. But now you still need to go and work on your endurance if it's needed, on your agility, you still need to do that on your own. But now it's like people were like, okay, well, I need to develop the athlete, so we're going to try to do all of this in the gym, in a weight room that's often not designed to that type of work. And now we're going to do like sports specific stuff with pulleys and dumbbells and so it didn't really work out. So people became confused. So it's almost like now in 2025, you want to be super novel and avant-garde with your sports performance training. Well, just go back to training the way they did in the late 70s.
Yeah, because the biggest thing is they're trying to put all this into the time constraints of an hour-long training session, which is just never going to happen. Like, this was developed for people spending 8 hours at a training facility. So they're doing one element of their training, they've got a recovery, they've maybe got some sort of treatment, they're going to do another element, recovery, food, treatment, another element, and they're spending the whole day there. And obviously this can only be applied to professional athletes, but then people are like, all right, they're doing all this within a day, so I want to do all this within one training session, and I'm going to do this on a 16-year-old athlete.
Yeah, so it gets so confusing and it's so deconstructed, it doesn't even make sense. It's like, for example, like working on foot stability and eye coordination and posture and flexibility and endurance and coordination and strength and power. All of this is all great. But now the problem is if you're training these 8 or 9 elements within a 60-minute confine, it's almost better to not do anything because you're doing a bunch of nothing. Yeah. Like you're not doing enough of anything to really help anything. So instead, let's just focus on what we can actually affect in a weight room, because that's where I am working right now. So what's the main thing we can affect? Well, strength and or conditioning.
So I've heard you say it a couple of times, the biomotor abilities.
Yes.
So now when you're saying you are a strength coach, you are a personal trainer, and you have that athlete for, let's say, an hour 4 times a week, what are the biomotor abilities that you should focus on the most?
I mean, there's 3 main ones that are recognized across all sources. Number 1, strength. And this is by a landslide the one recognized as the main quality because it just helps improve everything else. So you have strength. Number 2, you have speed. And number 3, you have endurance. So, of course, these are 3 biomotor abilities, but depending on the sports and or the position you play, one of the 3 might be more prevalent than the other. So, for example, Bampa develop like little models, like they call it the triads, where you have the 3 biomotor abilities at the end of a triangle with a circle around it. And I don't know the term in English, but when
Venn diagram.
when the circle crosses,
Yeah.
right? So now you basically, depending on the sport, pinpoint where the main emphasis is, right? So for example, baseball would be right in between that speed and strength where they both cross over. Whereas football would be speed and strength, a little bit more on speed. Whereas soccer would be more on speed and endurance. So depending on the sport, the emphasis shifts, like depending on what's needed. So that's what needs to be mostly emphasized in the overall training. But one thing that we consider here at Kilo is at the base, we want a well-balanced athlete no matter what. So if you're an athlete playing soccer, and yes, speed and endurance are the main factors, well, if you want to improve and we realize that your strength level is super low, well, guess what? Driving strength might be a very easy, efficient way to improve everything else. So that's how we kind of look at it. And then obviously out of these 3 biomotor abilities, there's subdivision, like agility, change of direction, muscular endurance, speed endurance. There's a bunch of different things.
But with the agility and like change of direction, is that something you're saying as the strength coach within your hour session you're addressing?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even like improving someone's strength will have a positive correlation on both agility and change of direction. So technically we are, but we're not actually going out and saying this is what we're training within this session. We're going to have a positive carryover due to the larger biomotor ability that we're training.
Exactly. It's just that these 3 biomotor abilities are at the core of athleticism.
Yeah.
So does working strength works change of direction? Directly, no. But indirectly, yes. Because change of direction is greatly improved with higher level of maximal strength.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that we are saying you're working with an athlete. So it's that athlete already has the skills
for his
to
sport,
some extent, of the sport.
Yeah, and then there's the other point of that whole long-term athlete development talk where coordination and agility, as important as it is, it's mostly the brain mostly learn these skills as during the prepubescent years. Post-puberty, those biomotor abilities are very, very hard to train.
Yeah.
So the only thing is past 12 on average, your best bet is to maintain these things. But maintaining these things during their long season, because understand that Kilo or biased team sports, they have long seasons. So they're playing their sport for a long time. Yeah. So to have a 8 to 12 week off season, it's not like they're going to have a crazy drop off of these skills. But I'm not saying to not do anything. Like the vast majority of the pro athletes I train in the off season would still go and do drills to maintain acquisition, but not to the level that it would deter from the off season training, because they knew, hey, I only have 2 or 3 months to bring back up all these biomotor abilities to where they should be. So I'm going to focus on the bigger factors. And again, they're all important, but I just feel that strength is the most underrated one, because not only does it impact everything, but you'd be surprised how weak athletes are in general.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them, today's world, were brought up with the messed up system that I was talking about, where they're trying to train everything all at once in 60 minutes. So then you end up having athletes that are subpar. And then you could argue, but the athletes of today are bigger, stronger, faster. Yeah. But a big factor here is, one, there are way more people playing sports from a young age now than 50 years ago. And two, there is a natural selection. Like the elite of the elite, unfortunately, a lot of them are there despite of the training they've been doing. Okay, so it can be a little bit misleading. And then there's also the injury prevention component. Yeah. As crazy as it is, because there's been so many advances in strength and conditioning in terms of prehab, rehab, injury prevention. But the ironic part is there are more injuries now in pro sports than there ever was.
Well, again, it goes back to there being more athletes that are more elite. They're stronger, but they might not be getting as strong as they necessarily should. And then you just have these, you always say it, like these bigger athletes have worse injuries.
But stronger is a big term, because the perception is that these athletes from today are stronger because they look stronger. Yeah. But trust me, they are not. Yeah. They just look stronger. And one of the main factor influencing injury rate, it's not me saying this, but it's strength. Yeah. So the stronger you are, the less likely you are to have injury. The weaker you are, the higher the incidence of injuries. So that kind of proves my point that although athletes now look stronger, they're actually not, which is one of the reasons they get injured more. Now, I'm not talking about concussion and stuff like that, but I'm talking more about like soft tissue type of
non-contact.
Yeah, which we see man, in the NFL this year. Yeah. Wow, how many Achilles and blown knees have we seen this season? Yeah. It's unbelievable on non-contact. Like Jalen Phillips with the Dolphins 2 years ago as a D end. First step down, blew his Achilles. Yeah. So I just think that people's nutrition is horrible, the stress level, the lifestyle. Like, there's so many factors, of course, but to me, if you're in the private sector and you see your athlete 1 hour, focus on the big building blocks. And obviously, strength is an easy one because, trust me, people are weak as hell.
Yeah. Then, going back to the biomotor abilities, so the three big ones were strength, speed, and endurance. Then you always have to look what's in between those two. So what is strength and speed? Speed, strength, so power. What is speed and endurance? Speed, endurance. So there's always a correlation to them all. So it's not that it's just those three. Those are just the three overarching biggest ones, and everything else is going to fall as somewhere within the spectrum of those three.
And then beyond this, what I think is super cool and important to not forget, and this is Frank Dick in his book, Physical Training. There's 3 words, Physical Training Principles, I think it's called. It's 2002. But he basically came up with some type of a hierarchy of skills or biomotor skills for athletic development. So he has the strength, speed, and endurance as the core of the triad. But to him, in the middle of that, and this is even more so important for youth, is mobility. Yeah. Because strength, speed, and endurance, as great as they are, if you have zero mobility, you can't express those properly. If you want to sprint fast, but your stride length is 1 foot long, you can be strong like Hafthor Bjornsson, but you're never going to be fast. Plus, you risk injuries like crazy. So, in reality, probably the first initial thing that should be developed is mobility. And then once you have adequate mobility for the task that you're supposed to do, now is making sure that mobility is functional, that you can exert and develop strength through that entire range of motion so that you can make use of that mobility. And what's interesting is that flexibility, which is the base of mobility, is mostly trained pre-puberty as well. So if you are a coach listening to this, working with youth, especially elementary school youth, well, focusing on flexibility as they're doing their sport, which will create mobility, might be the most important thing you can do. So that's why having elementary school kids do sports like gymnastics or martial arts like taekwondo, which is very leg kick dominant, which requires a lot of flexibility, is probably the best thing you can do for your kid, because the more flexibility you'll develop before puberty, the easier it will be to maintain that flexibility later on in your life. Because if you get post-puberty stiff as steel, like, I'm not saying that you cannot improve flexibility,
take a lot more
but it's
work.
going to be so much more work that will detract from developing the strength and speed that should be the priority at that point in time. Well, in fact, speed should also be trained pre-puberty and like a few years post, whereas strength should be the focus more at the 15, 16-year-old base. And then later on, like 17, 18, then you can start introducing endurance. But so you see, like at the end of the day, athleticism stems from these things. But depending on where you are in time with your athlete, some needs to be emphasized more than the other.
When you're saying that strength is 15 and 16, does that...
For males.
That's what I was going to say. Does it
Yeah.
change for male and females?
Like female, always, because women's nervous system matures quicker, so you always have to account for 1 or 2 years less.
Yeah, and this is all
Female.
obviously just on average.
Yeah.
So because everyone develops at such different rates, like that's the average. All right, someone's 15, you probably can start developing strength. But yeah, like some people are going to develop that a little earlier, some people will be a little later.
I'll always remember, like, in the late 90s, early 2000s, Portland Trailblazers, first pick overall, drafted Greg Oden. And he was like, 20 at the time? He looked like he was 43 years old. But it was unbelievable. So, maturity is individual.
It's relative.
And then if you have young athletes prior to the 15, 14, whatever that age, and you have them in the gym, you're always working on more technical and not trying to develop strength.
Yeah, you can start strength training at 5 or 6 if you want, but it needs to be more like multi-joint movement, technical, intermuscular coordination, lightweight, kind of getting control of those ranges of motion more than anything else. Training in general should be more like drill, game-like. It shouldn't be so rigid.
What should be the max though? Because we see like teenagers, like in schools, like high school, that they're they're still lifting 300 pounds, they're squatting 400 pounds, they're doing all those things. Like what?
But that's fine. But only if the base is there. The problem in North American sport, and now Europe is becoming the same anyways. But what's happening though is they're doing all of this, but with a completely destroyed foundation. Yeah. So they're just compounding issues that later on, when they're like 21 plus and they come to see me, then they all messed up, and we have to basically rewind 10 years of training to start rebuilding back up, because they were deadlifting 380 all messed up because they didn't have any mobility, they have coordination, they don't have any of that.
Yeah, I love the trap bar. But there's a reason why so many places are highly reliant on it. And yes, it's easier to coach and all that there, but it's because it doesn't require any mobility to get into that fucking position. So people can just load weight without ever addressing the underlying issues that is going to prevent them for long-term displays of athleticism. And it's just like, all right, you're cool. They just deadlifted 405 on a trap bar. Like, yeah, but they can't fucking touch their toes. Like, it's like putting the cart before the horse. It's ridiculous.
What's the lowest rep you would do with a high school kid?
It doesn't matter. It could be one. Yeah. It could be one, as long as the load is not maximal.
No, well, okay.
So what I'm saying is the youth.
Not my high school training. It was definitely maximal.
But honestly, like the youth, should strength train at less than 80% of 1 RM. And by youth, I mean youth. I'm not talking about like a well-developed 17, 18-year-old, okay? Well, no, high school can be 17, 18. You know, in the U.S., it works a little different, but like it's junior high. Is that what it is?
Middle school.
Middle school would be more like, if you're strength training, it should be sub-maximal, which is 80% or less, very technique, drill, range of motion dominant. And one of the facets of the barbell world that I respect enormously, that I'm sad that it was not part of existence when I was a kid, is Olympic weightlifting. Like growing up, like in my little town in Quebec, like I didn't even know it existed. Yeah. To me, like strength training, barbell was bodybuilding. Arnold Schwarzenegger. So that's all I did. But looking back, if I could go back in time when I was 11, when I started, I wish I would have started with Olympic weightlifting because it built such a great base. And if you look at really high-level Olympic weightlifters, they all have incredible ranges of motion. They have incredible control of these ranges of motion, which means they have great mobility. Like their knees goes a foot in front of their toes, their ass to grass, their shoulder mobility is extreme, thoracic extension is great. Like, and they have all of that mobility and all of that control. And guess what? I'm not saying they never get injured, but their incidence of injury training at these high loads and high velocities and long ranges of motion is very low compared to other type of athletes. But guess what they have that most barbell athletes don't? They have a true foundational base from an early age that they spent, like the Russians spent 3 years with an empty barbell just working on technique before they even load. Like, people forgot about the importance of a solid foundation of biomotor abilities and mobility first. And like, man, like I moved so much as a kid. Like I didn't really have friends and I didn't really play a lot of sports as a kid because I was moving all the time, that I missed so much of like my mobility has been affected by this. Like it's really hard. Like if you don't set the tone right from an early age, you're making it so much harder to reach high level of performance in the sports world.
Like if you look, I mean, gymnastics was my sport, but if you don't start gymnastics when you're 5 or 6 years old, I mean, you can, like I started older. I was like 12 and I did gymnastics, but I wasn't like great at it. Like I couldn't catch up on that. No matter, like, I mean, we stretched and did mobility stuff for an hour, like 4-5 times a week. I got a little bit more flexible, but not a whole lot more flexible.
Yeah, you started later.
I started.
But then it's funny
there's no catching up those years.
But it's still, yes, you have some issues where you feel tight and some limitations in your own training, but overall, like
I'm
you
still
do
more flexible than most people.
Yeah, like you have a lot more flexibility than you would think.
But so, I'm sorry if you wanted to talk, but so for example, like the athlete that I've trained the longest in my career, I trained his entire pro career. He first came to me, was 21 years old, straight out of college. But he was a first round pick, great running back, but technically speaking, he had so many weaknesses. Yeah. He had so many limiting factors that was preventing him to be like at a super high level of athleticism, that as much as I like strength and power development in the weight room, the first off season with him, like it was, our PAB course, it was basically, that's all we did because that was his biggest weakness. Yeah. Like we did a little bit of strength. We did zero power. As a 21-year-old NFL running back, none of that, because we had to basically break all the bad habits he got from high school and college training and work on the deficiency that he had. Like he couldn't brace, he couldn't lunge, he couldn't there was so many things that weren't right, that became the focus. So at the end of the day, if we go back to the original question, what is sports performance for Kilo? Well, to me, I don't even care the sport you're playing. At the end of the day, if you're completely dysfunctional as an athlete,
even if you're elite level,
it doesn't matter. Like we need to take a step back and like, whoa, okay. Like I'm not going to be able to do what I know that I can do with you if you can't move properly without pain. So we need to address that first, no matter what. And then once you address this up to a certain point, because it's at that point, it's never going to be perfect. But now at least we have a solid base, less risk of injury, higher potential for strength development. And now year 2, and mostly year 3 in this case, when we really started pushing the strength, whoa, then it was a significant change in his performance. But it is a step-by-step thing.
Yeah, so like once you address those issues, then you have the chance to really affect performance, because there's the idea of strength deficit to strength reserve. So say the squat's a really easy way to look at this. So squat is highly correlated to speed and power outcomes. So driving up maximal strength can really help that. But a strength deficit, so anywhere, the researchers find anything like of 1.7 times your body weight, there starts to be a strength association with improved performances. So anything under that, you're in a strength deficit for that lower body lift. So you're limiting your strength or your performance potential just on a strength output. So under that 1.7, you are definitely at a strength deficit. You're at higher risk of injury. You're less chance of overall performance, less chance of speed, less chance of power. Once you hit that 1.7, there's now going to be a strength association. Any further increase in strength is going to have an associated benefit of improved performance, chance of improved or decreased likelihood of non-contact injury, all that sort of things. And then once you hit about the 2 times body weight, some people go up as far as 2.2, then you're starting to build into a strength reserve. And that there's when we're like, okay, any additional strength beyond this is good. It's going to keep improving you, but not to the same extent as when you're in that strength association. So once you hit that strength reserve point, now you can really focus on other biomotor abilities. That's when you can really start saying, all right, this person needs more power, more speed, and we can really focus more of the training down that alley. But until you hit that strength reserve point, you are going to get way more positive benefits from focusing on that strength side of things, so the maximal strength, and really try and push into the strength reserve. And then you've got the idea of, okay, we have a 9-month-long season or an 8-month-long season. All right, would it be better to be like 10, 15% into that strength reserve? So even if detraining occurs during the season, you're still going to have a strength reserve? Yeah, it would be great. But it just then depends on the demands of the sport.
Exactly. Like he's 100% right. Like the strength association is where you're going to perform pretty well. But once you get into that strength reserve, that's when you're really optimizing things. And like Porrick said, so once you hit the 2 times body weight squat, okay, now you're entering the strength reserve part of the equation. Cool. But now at that point, this is when, okay, now let's go and focus on the other skills that are not as great. Let's say endurance. So now you focus a little bit on endurance. Once you've brought up the endurance, then it's not a bad thing to go and revisit strength to push that strength reserve further up, like he was saying, 10 or 15%. So that, because the problem with team sports, the season are long. So you want to make sure that if there is some detraining in season, which typically happens in team sports, at least your strength reserve is so high that even if there's a detraining, you're still falling within the strength association window, which still means that your performance likelihood of injury is still optimized. So that's why strength is so important.
And that's why we say strength, you can improve strength by 400% compared to all the other qualities, which may be like 5 or 10%. But what people don't realize is when you start training, maybe you can only, maybe not an athlete, but let's say you can only squat your body weight. Well, you can increase that by 400% over the years and get into those areas where now you can squat 1.7 times your body weight. So that's like a 400% increase. I think a lot of people don't look at it that way. And then also, even before you get to 1.7, if you're at 1, I mean, you're still getting some improvement in performance when you go from 1 to 1.1 to 1.2. So you're still getting all those benefits, even if like on your way to get to the 1.7 or 2 point.
Yeah, but it's just that if you have someone that he comes to you and his squat is only 1 times body weight, but then you're like, okay, we're going to do squats. We're going to do 3 sets of squats, but then we need to do agility, speed, power, flexibility in our 60 minutes. Well, then the problem is you're not really optimizing strength. So now your power training, agility training, change of direction training, all of this becomes limited in the magnitude of gains because you're not addressing the big building block, which is strength. You're not fully addressing it.
But a lot of people don't understand that. Like in the party situation, I always say that, like when people ask, "Oh, you guys only do strength?" And well, why? Because of that. Because there's so much room for improvement. There's more, bang for your buck.
And that's the thing too that's important for people to understand. Like, like the first year with somebody that's really, really weak, from the outside looking in, if they're looking at the 4 60-minute strength training session I'm doing with the athlete, it might look like, dude, it's like all you're doing is freaking strength is over. Like, why just strength? Well, first of all, that's all he's doing with me.
Yep.
But when he's not with me, he's still doing other stuff, first of all, to maintain their athleticism. But the reason we're doing strength is because it's so weak that we need to improve it to be able to improve everything else. But it's like people can't understand this. And then the worst, the thing that drives me nuts is to see all these 14-year-old do like just ridiculous drills that don't translate to nothing.
Yeah, because like if an athlete shows up for the first day of the off season and he has a 2.5 times body weight squat, okay, we definitely don't need to dedicate as much time to strength. I am yet to see that happen.
Yeah.
I'm sure it happens. I'm sure some athletes maintain strength to that extent year round, but very, very few. Yeah. Most people, it detrains to the point that you need to retrain it within the off season. Maybe not for the full off season, but it definitely, like, I'm yet to come across someone who just has it and can maintain that year round with very, very low volume and emphasis.
Yeah, and let's not be ridiculous too. Like, we're not blind to think that all you need is strength and then you're good. You're never going to get injured. Again, like I said, if you're focusing on strength but you're omitting the mobility component, well, then you're more likely to get injured now because you're creating an even bigger discrepancy between active and passive range of motion. So you're even more at risk. Yeah. So we're always talking about strength in the context of adequate mobility for the task that the athlete is supposed to do.
Yeah, and then, like, yes, we're doing a lot of talk about strength here, but even at that, for our sports performance warm-up, it's very highly plyometric in nature. We're trying to prepare the athlete for the upcoming demands of the season, one of which is plyometric activity. So we're still training that. It's just not the emphasis of the training session. It is a component. We're going to try and prepare those structures. We're going to try and build appropriate volumes. We're going to build intensity throughout the duration of the off season, but it's never going to be 100% the focus of the session outside of very, very rare circumstances.
When you're saying warm-ups, you're talking more specifically to a plyo type of warm-up?
Yeah, so the general warm-up, unless they need a lot of mobility work, which if they need a lot of mobility work, they're probably better off addressing it as a separate session within the day. But we're going to reduce the general warm-up on the mobility side of things and really up the plyometric side of things, because it's going to far more carry over to the demands that they're exposed to within their sport. So, like, we're going to start with very extensive work, really building a lot of volume and frequency and try and build the resiliency of those tissues. And then as the off season progresses, the extensive work's obviously going to come down in volume, and the intensive work's going to go up.
Yeah, and then just doing this sometimes with people who have very low level of strength in the power realm, just that warm up will be enough for a lot of athletes to improve power output, even if the training per se has no power training, because they're not there yet anyways.
Yeah.
So in terms of incorporating these types of plyo warm-ups for athletes, and you're saying they do get benefits of power from this, is it something where you can start integrating these with younger athletes?
Yeah, definitely. It'd be way more on the extensive side. We're going to spend way more time there. So it's not focusing on all out
reps.
jumps. It's reps, sub-maximal effort. So you're just trying to get a lot of volume and really build up tissue tolerance. Then you can incorporate some intensive things, but you just don't want to put you just don't want to overemphasize the intensive things too early, because you're taking away from the potential of further training adaptations later on in their training career. So you just want to build in the extensive things and then spend more time on your strength. Whereas with more advanced athletes, we want to have somewhat of a bridge between the two, because we're still looking to maximize the power output once they get to that stage. But yes, you can definitely start to incorporate that with youth athletes. It'd be a great thing, because it even very young people, it's still like there is a coordination aspect. There's like a frequency, there's a timing aspect. So they're still building that skill.
And then that's the thing too. Like nowadays with social media, sprinters who 30 years ago you knew sprinters, but you would never see them train. Now, like top level sprinters have their own social media, so they're showcasing their training. And now a lot of strength coaches with their youth athlete are trying to mimic the training that these guys are doing. But like even like a pro hockey player is nowhere near at the level of I'm forgetting his name. Who's the Italian sprinter?
The
top Italian sprinter. I'm forgetting his name, but like his training is pretty thorough. It's a lot of intense. Marcel Jacobs. A lot of very intensive type of stuff, and it looks super cool. Like it's like wow, it's like tape à l'œil for. Anyways, it's flashy and enticing. So now the coaches want to do this with their kids, but like it's not going to do anything because they're nowhere near the baseline of that guy. Like some dude who can sprint in less than 10 seconds. They're wired different. Their strength base is adequate. And again, sprinting, that's one task.
Yep. Straight
line with perfect technique, high forces, high velocities for 10 seconds. That's it. So some guy that spent his entire life focusing on this, now you're asking a 16-year-old NHL hockey, not NHL, but hockey player, you're going to do the same thing because look how great that athlete is.
Yeah. I hate it. I feel so bad for so many of the young athletes now because, it comes from the parents as well, not just the youth athletes seeing it online, but they think that they should be training like the professional athletes. And it's such a disservice and it's so frustrating to see it happen so often.
Yep.
But a lot of the team sports professional athletes in North America are training in a way that they shouldn't train because they're not even ready yet. Yeah. And now they're having 16-year-old trained that way. And also, and the problem is, and then there's been research on this, and the problem is, again, if you're in the private sector for a short off season, it's your income depends on your ability to attract clients, right? So of course you want kids to come. So you want the training to look super cool for the kids to come for that short off-season period of time. So now, if all you're doing is you're focusing on speed and power and agility for your 8 weeks with that kid, and then you have all of the tech to measure power, and then you do pre and then you do post, they're going to improve. So it's going to look like your training system is highly successful. So now you're going to attract more kids to come, and then great, you're a successful business owner because you have a bunch of kids coming because they're stat on all that technology is improving. But it's a short-term improvement, and it's nowhere near the peak of improvement that you could get if you actually worked on the base. But the problem with strength is, one, it's harder to truly gain strength than what people think, because you need intent, you need consistency, you need compliance, you need nutrition and recovery to be in check, where a lot of kids won't. And a lot of coaches don't have the ability to be able to force their athlete to be good at all these aspects. So they realize that it's a little too hard to drive strength to where it needs to be in that 8 or 12 week off season. So they're not showcasing the results to attract other people. So screw this. I'm going to focus on that flashy stuff so we can affect change, but it's fake. It doesn't do anything. And then that kid can make it as a pro athlete because he's talented, but then once they're pro and everybody's talented and now they need an edge, now they come to the coach and now you're like, well, dude, we have a lot of work to do because you're nowhere near ready.
Yeah. And like, so say that kid makes it as pro, that means they're hyper talented. But how many kids like that do you actually come across? Like, it's the turning the kid that's mediocre, who's average, into a professional athlete. That's what most coaches need to build their business off if they want to develop professional athletes, because you only get freak kids every so often, whereas you get a lot of mediocre kids that have the potential to work hard and make it, but not the freak athlete.
I was to think of like longevity of the athlete. Like, people want to do the things that's going to affect something now, but like later on, they're going to be all messed up because they haven't worked on the base of strength.
I think of one of the Kilo coaches. He's very successful, primarily trains athletes, has a lot of youth athletes. And I was talking to him about his intake process and his buy-in process. And he's incorporated a lot of the tech and the showy stuff just into the initial assessment and intake to get the buy-in from the parents and the athletes, but then doesn't actually use it in the training. So it's just a way to be like flashy up front to make it seem comparable to the other sports facilities that are out there doing all these things, attracting the athletes. But then once they sign up and they're actually training, he's doing what matters.
But it's tough because it's so ingrained in the kid's mind that to be the next Saquon Barkley, you need to do all these drills, that now if they're doing squats and bench press for an entire training session and their buddies are doing cool drills with elastic bands and whatever, well, now that kid's like, well,
I want to do the fun
I
stuff.
want to do the stuff that everybody's doing that's going to make me into Saquon Barkley. I don't want to do that. So it's this really tough thing nowadays to get the full buy-in from the client.
You have to do the food displacement thing. So you do all the hard stuff that they need to do, and then at the end, save 10 minutes and have them do all those things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, still focus most of your session on the strength, and then just
but then
do fun stuff.
The unfortunate part is all the fun stuff's also easier.
Yeah.
You're not going to be sore after it.
Yeah.
So it's way easier from the buy-in perspective. Kids love it, but it's not going to do them justice.
We're the adults. We're the responsible ones. Kids want to eat junk food. We don't let them eat junk food. We make them eat good food. Same thing with weight training.
But that's what was interesting for me. Like in 2005, when I started training pro athletes in St. Louis. Like, okay, I had a few like really young, like 21, 22, but a lot of them were like 28, 29 plus. And they're all like high level. They're all talented, right? They're all in the league. But it's only at that point that they really realize, man, I wish I would have done right from the get-go, because now I'm only 28 years old and I have so many issues that needs to be addressed. So then it became this quasi overwhelming, training procedure because we had so much things to improve, but they did it because they understood that, hey, if I want to keep playing 5-6 more years, I need to be doing this. And they always say the same thing. I wish I would have done this earlier.
Yeah. I know this is not the right audience to say this to, because this needs to go to the kids themselves. Like, multi-sport kids are great, and you should play as many sports as possible growing up. But by the time you're 16, 17, you also have to make sure you have a dedicated off season so you can start to integrate these good habits and build the base. Because if you're still a 4-sport kid until you're 24, fuck.
Yeah.
If you have the goals of becoming
to become elite in one thing, it's going to be really hard. So you're going to have to, at some stage, you have to dedicate the time to the generalization of strength training.
And we have to be realistic. Like, parents need to understand that, no, your kid is not Deion Sanders. No, your kid is not Bo Jackson. Is not Cooper DeJean. Like, people have to be realistic.
Yep.
So most people need a step-by-step approach in developing the qualities to their max potential.
Yeah, that intake discussion with the parents needs to become, if you really love your kid, you're not going to do all the stupid shit. You're going to dedicate the time to...
But on the other hand, like, get them playing as many sports as possible up to that point.
Yeah.
Because you're training loads of different biomotor abilities and different movement patterns, and learn different coordination patterns, different skills, learn to play with different teammates so you understand better communication. There's so many benefits. Even a team sport versus individual sports, have them try both.
Yeah.
And if you're a personal trainer or strength coaches that specializes with youth athlete, I know that personally, like, if I had a kid and I wanted to give my kid the best chances to make it at high level in sports, I'd be willing to invest a lot more on a really good coach with a really great system that's well-rounded, because that's the problem too, man. Like, so many strength coach, but also sports coach, are so bad that even if you do a bunch as a youth, you might not be doing the right thing. Like, it was years, like in the 80s and villages in Quebec. I lived in a 5,000 population town, like in high school. The coaching was horrible. Like, my hockey coach was like a trucker who was the dad of the goalie who did this because nobody else wanted to be the coach, and he's the one coaching us hockey. He doesn't even know anything about it. So, like, the fundamentals I never learned. So, like, I think it's really, really important for youth to have really, really, really high level coaching so that the skills can actually be properly developed. Like, my dad was a baseball coach for 1 year. He never played baseball. Like, he liked baseball, but like, what? You're going to teach me how to swing a bat? Like, you don't even know. Like, he couldn't even bunt.
Poor dad.
So,
Our next sports performance seminar is November 8th to the 9th this year. It was really cool. A couple of weeks ago, we had the first 2-day sports performance seminar here at Kilo. And thankfully, as we strongly encouraged, every student that attended had previously completed the online off-season assessment course, because it truly is, again, we don't require it because, cool, if you don't want to come prepared, that's up to you. But everything ties into that. So now this course is just 2 days. So we have 2 days to cover everything: periodization, program design, nutrition, and supplementation, which is a lot to cover in 2 days. But because everyone had previously done the online course, we got to go right into laying out the periodization and the program design of it.
Because it's so important, because every phase of the off season, the program design is dictated as a response to the athlete off-season assessment.
Yeah.
So the problem is, if you didn't do it, because I don't talk about the assessment in the class, so if you didn't do it,
you won't know.
You don't know what I'm talking about. When I'm saying, okay, phase 2, here is what we do because of this results in the assessment with this drill and whatever.
You
it
have all
is.
your pretty charts in the courses now.
Yeah, like, since I learned how to use Canva, it's beautiful.
Any closing remarks on sports performance?
Mobility first.
Mobility first.
But
Be-
even, sorry,
Stick
go.
to the basics.
Be general, specialize late.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, that's it for sports performance today. Thanks for tuning in. See you later this year.